August 8th, 1957. 6:15 a.m. on a Thursday morning. A cramped apartment above a defunct butcher shop on 139th Street, just 2 blocks from where Bumpy Johnson's family lived. 9 white men sat around a table covered with street maps, photographs, and handwritten schedules. They'd been there since 4 a.m., drinking coffee from a thermos, smoking cigarettes, planning what they believed would be a decisive strike against Harlem's most powerful figure. The leader was a 46-year-old man named Edward Krantz, a former NYPD officer who'd been forced to resign in 1953 after excessive force complaints. He'd joined the Ku Klux Klan 6 months later, finding purpose in an organization that channeled his racial resentment into coordinated action. By 1957, he'd risen to become the exalted Cyclops of the Bronx chapter, essentially a local commander with authority over 40 active members. Krantz pointed to a circled location on the map, the corner of 139th Street and St. Nicholas Avenue, directly on the route that Bumpy Johnson's daughter Ruthie took every morning to catch the subway to Hunter College. She leaves the building at 7:45 a.m., Krantz explained to the other 8 men. Walks north on St. Nicholas, crosses at 140th, catches the downtown A train at 7:52. Same route, same time, every weekday. We've watched her for 3 weeks. She's never late, never varies. The plan was simple and brutal. 6 men would position themselves along 139th Street between Edgecombe Avenue and St. Nicholas Avenue, a single block, maybe 300 feet. When Ruthie Johnson walked through, they'd surround her, deliver their message to Bumpy Johnson through threats against his daughter, and disperse before anyone could respond. "We're not touching her," Krantz emphasized. "Just surrounding, threatening, making it clear that his family isn't safe. That's the message. We prove that Bumpy Johnson, for all his power, can't protect the people he loves." One of the younger men, Thomas Decker, a 23-year-old dock worker from Queens, asked the obvious question: what if someone intervenes? This is Harlem. People know who she is. At 7:45 in the morning, most people are either still inside or rushing to work, Krantz replied. "We'll be gone in under 2 minutes. Nobody's going to risk confronting 9 white men to protect some gangster's daughter." It was a reasonable calculation based on fear, on the assumption that intimidation would keep Harlem residents passive, on the belief that racial terror still held the same power it had wielded for decades. What Krantz didn't know, what none of the 9 men sitting in that apartment could have anticipated, was that their plan had been compromised before it even began. Because someone was listening, someone who'd been watching the watchers, documenting their surveillance of Ruthie Johnson, tracking their movements, and passing information to a network that operated faster and more efficiently than anything the Klan could imagine. At 6:17 a.m., 2 minutes after Krantz finished explaining the plan, a phone call was placed from a building across the street. The call went to a pool hall on Lenox Avenue that wouldn't open for business until noon, but where certain people could always be reached. The message was brief: 9 men, 139th Street, planning to ambush Bumpy's daughter at 7:45 this morning. What happened in the next 89 minutes will become one of the most talked about incidents in Harlem history. Not because of violence, though violence was certainly possible, but because of what an entire neighborhood did to protect one young woman. Because by 7:45 a.m., when Ruthie Johnson walked out of her building to go to class, 139th Street had transformed. Routes had changed. Patterns had shifted, and 9 Klan members would learn a lesson about the difference between planning terror and executing it in a community that refused to be terrorized. To understand what happened on 139th Street that August morning, you need to understand how information flowed through Harlem in 1957. The neighborhood was home to approximately 290,000 African Americans living in just over 3 square miles, one of the highest population densities in America. Every block had eyes. Every corner had people who noticed when strangers appeared, when routines changed, when something felt wrong. This wasn't paranoia. This was survival. By 1957, the civil rights movement was accelerating. 3 years earlier, in 1954, Brown v. Board of Education had declared school segregation unconstitutional. 2 years earlier, in 1955, Rosa Parks had sparked the Montgomery bus boycott. Change was coming, but so was backlash. Klan activity in northern cities had increased dramatically. Between 1955 and 1957, documented Klan-related incidents in New York tripled. Cross burnings, intimidation attempts, assaults on black families moving into white neighborhoods. The organization was desperate to demonstrate relevance, to prove they could still inspire fear. But Harlem had developed its own intelligence network. Store owners noticed unfamiliar cars parked on their blocks. Building superintendents tracked who came and went. Taxi drivers remembered fares and destinations. Street vendors observed patterns. And when those observations revealed something threatening, the information moved through channels that police couldn't access and Klan members couldn't see. The man who'd been watching the Klan members plan their ambush was a 58-year-old building superintendent named Marcus Webb. His apartment in a building across from the defunct butcher shop gave him a clear view of the second-floor windows where Krantz and his men had been meeting. Webb had fought in World War I, survived the 1935 Harlem riot, buried 2 sons who died in World War II. He'd seen enough violence to recognize it being planned. When he noticed white men gathering at odd hours in a building that should have been empty, photographing a young woman's daily route, he started documenting everything. He didn't go to the police. The NYPD's 28th Precinct, which covered central Harlem, was notoriously corrupt and often sympathetic to white supremacist ideology. Reporting to them would likely mean warning the Klan that they'd been compromised. Instead, Webb called someone he trusted, Samuel Brooks, who ran a newsstand on 135th Street and was known to have connections to Bumpy Johnson's organization. "Sam, it's Marcus Webb. I got a situation you need to know about. 9 white men planning something on 139th Street. They've been watching Bumpy's daughter. I think they're planning to grab her." Brooks didn't ask questions. He made one phone call to Illinois Gordon and said 6 words. "Webb has information. It's about Ruthie." Within 20 minutes, Marcus Webb was sitting in the back room of the pool hall on Lenox Avenue, explaining everything to Illinois Gordon and Junie Bird, Bumpy Johnson's 2 most trusted lieutenants. 6:47 a.m. Bumpy Johnson sat in his living room on Edgecombe Avenue, listening to Illinois Gordon and Junie Bird explain the situation. His daughter was asleep in the next room. His wife, Mamie, was making breakfast in the kitchen. The normalcy of the morning made the threat feel even more obscene. 9 men, Bumpy said quietly, on 139th Street, planning to surround Ruthie in 58 minutes. "We can have 50 people there in 20 minutes, Junie said. "We eliminate them before they—" "No," Bumpy interrupted. Both men looked at him, surprised. "If we respond with violence," Bumpy continued, "what happens? Police crack down on the entire neighborhood. The Klan gets media sympathy as victims of gangster retaliation. And Ruthie, she still has to walk that street every day, wondering if the next group will be smarter, more careful, harder to see coming." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at Harlem waking up, delivery trucks, early workers, the city beginning its day. "We do this differently," Bumpy said. "We show them that Harlem doesn't need violence to protect itself. We show them that this entire neighborhood is Ruthie's bodyguard." "How?" Illinois asked. Bumpy turned back to face them. "By making sure that when those 9 men try to ambush my daughter on an empty street, the street isn't empty. By making sure that every person on 139th Street at 7:45 this morning is there deliberately watching, protecting, making it impossible for anything to happen." It was brilliant strategy. Instead of meeting violence with violence, Bumpy was proposing to meet planned isolation with forced community. The Klan's entire plan depended on Ruthie being alone, vulnerable, without protection. So Bumpy would ensure she was never alone, never vulnerable, never unprotected. How do we organize this in less than an hour? Junie asked. Phone network, Bumpy replied. Same system we use for policy numbers, for warnings, for everything. We activate it now. Within 5 minutes, the calls were being made. Not to gangsters or enforcers, but to ordinary Harlem residents. Store owners, teachers, postal workers, nurses, people who lived on or near 139th Street, people whose morning routines could be adjusted, people who understood that protecting Bumpy Johnson's daughter was really about protecting the principle that Harlem took care of its own. The message was simple. Be on 139th Street between Edgecombe and St. Nicholas at 7:45 a.m. Walk your normal route. Do your normal business. Just be visible, be present, be witnesses. If you're interested in how real communities organized resistance against hate in the 1950s, not through violence, but through strategic collective action, make sure you're subscribed. This history shows how ordinary people became extraordinary protectors. 7:15 a.m., 30 minutes before the planned ambush. Edward Krantz and his 8 Klan members were in position along 139th Street. They'd arrived separately, dressed in work clothes, positioned themselves in doorways and near parked cars, trying to look casual while maintaining clear sight lines of the route Ruthie Johnson would walk. Krantz stood near the corner of 139th and St. Nicholas, where the actual confrontation would happen. Thomas Decker and 2 others were positioned mid-block. The remaining 5 were spread strategically to block any escape routes. The street was quiet. A few early workers heading to the subway. A delivery truck unloading at a corner market. Normal morning activity in a residential neighborhood. But then, around 7:20 a.m., something changed. More people appeared. Not running, not gathering, just appearing on the street. An elderly man walking his dog. 2 women heading to the bus stop. A postal worker checking mailboxes earlier than usual. A teacher leaving for work. A nurse in her uniform. A maintenance worker with his tool bag. By 7:25 a.m., there were 15 people visible on 139th Street between Edgecombe and St. Nicholas. By 7:30 a.m., there were 30. By 7:35 a.m., there were over 50. Krantz started to notice. This wasn't normal. 139th Street was a residential block. People left for work, but not all at once, not in these numbers. And they weren't just passing through. They were lingering, walking slowly, stopping to talk, creating a continuous presence along the entire block. Something's wrong, Krantz muttered to Decker, who'd moved closer. There's too many people. Maybe it's just coincidence, Decker replied, but he didn't sound convinced. At 7:38 a.m., a police car turned onto 139th Street. Not speeding, not responding to a call, just a routine patrol. But it drove the length of the block slowly, the officers inside clearly observing the unusual number of people on the street. The patrol car parked at the corner of 139th and Edgecombe. The 2 officers, one white, one black, got out and started talking to residents. Casual conversation, nothing aggressive, but their presence was unmistakable. At 7:42 a.m., a street vendor set up a coffee cart at the corner of 139th and St. Nicholas, exactly where Krantz was standing. The vendor, a man named Joseph Martinez who'd lived in Harlem for 30 years, smiled at Krantz. "Morning coffee?" Martinez asked. "I'm fine," Krantz replied tersely. "You sure? You've been standing here a while. Thought you might need some." It was a polite way of saying, "I've been watching you. I know you don't belong here." By 7:44 a.m., 1 minute before Ruthie Johnson was scheduled to leave her building, 139th Street had transformed completely. There were over 70 people visible on a single block. Not protesting, not confronting, just present, going about their business, creating a wall of witnesses that made any kind of ambush impossible. Krantz looked around at the scene and realized what had happened. They'd been compromised. Somehow, someone had found out about the plan and mobilized the entire neighborhood. "We're leaving," he told the men nearest him. "Pass it along." Everyone disperses. Now, 7:45 a.m. Ruthie Johnson, 22 years old and in her senior year at Hunter College, walked out of her building at 409 Edgecombe Avenue. She was dressed for class, skirt, blouse, cardigan, carrying a book bag with her textbooks for constitutional law and American history. She had no idea that 9 Klan members had planned to ambush her. She had no idea that her father had activated a neighborhood-wide protection network. She had no idea that 70-plus people were on the street specifically to ensure her safety. She just knew that 139th Street seemed busier than usual that morning. Mrs. Henderson, who lived on the 3rd floor of her building, was walking the same direction. "Morning, Ruthie. Heading to school?" "Yes, ma'am. You're up early." "Doctor's appointment." Mrs. Henderson lied smoothly. She got a call at 6:50 a.m. asking if she could walk the same route as Ruthie this morning. She hadn't asked why. In Harlem, when someone asked you to be somewhere to help protect the community, you showed up. As Ruthie walked down 139th Street towards St. Nicholas Avenue, she passed familiar faces: Mr. Washington, who ran the barber shop on 135th, Mrs. Chun, who owned the laundromat, Jerome, the postal worker. All of them nodded, said good morning, created a continuous presence. She also passed 9 unfamiliar white men who were trying very hard to look casual while clearly being uncomfortable. They were leaving the block in different directions, abandoning their positions, their carefully planned ambush completely neutralized. Ruthie noticed them. You noticed white men in Harlem in 1957, but she didn't think much of it. Maybe construction workers, maybe city inspectors, maybe just people who had business in the neighborhood. She reached the subway station at 7:52 a.m., exactly on schedule. She caught the downtown A train. She went to her constitutional law class. She had a normal Thursday. She wouldn't learn until that evening, when her father sat her down and explained everything, that she'd been the target of a Klan ambush that had been stopped not by violence, but by a neighborhood simply refusing to leave her alone. The 9 Klan members left Harlem separately, defeated without a single confrontation, humiliated without anyone speaking a word of mockery. Edward Krantz drove back to the Bronx, his carefully planned operation dissolved by nothing more than people being present on a public street. He called an emergency meeting of his Klan chapter for that evening. "We were compromised," he told the assembled members. "Someone found out about the plan and mobilized the neighborhood. There were 70, maybe 80 people on that street. Police were there. We couldn't even get close." "How did they know?" someone asked. "I don't know," Krantz admitted. "But it means we have a leak. Or it means Harlem has an intelligence network better than ours. Either way, we can't operate there." It was a crushing admission. The Ku Klux Klan, an organization built on intimidation and terror, admitting that an entire neighborhood had outsmarted them through nothing more than collective presence. Over the next 3 weeks, several things happened that demonstrated the broader consequences. August 12, 1957, the New York Amsterdam News ran a story about unusual community vigilance on 139th Street. The article didn't explicitly mention the Klan plot. Doing so would have revealed sources, but it celebrated how Harlem residents had created spontaneous neighborhood watch that prevented unspecified threats. Anyone who'd been involved understood the real story. August 19th, 1957, Marcus Webb, the building superintendent who'd first spotted the Klan members planning their ambush, received an envelope under his door. Inside was $500 in cash and a note. "Thank you for watching. Friends." It was more than 2 months' rent. Webb never confirmed who sent it, but he had his suspicions. August 24th, 1957, Edward Krantz resigned as exalted Cyclops of the Bronx Klan chapter. According to later accounts, the failed 139th Street operation had embarrassed the leadership. Krantz moved to New Jersey within 6 months and quit the Klan entirely by 1959. September 1957, Klan activity in Harlem dropped to near zero. The organization had attempted several operations in the neighborhood over the previous 2 years: intimidation, threats, minor vandalism. After the 139th Street failure, they effectively abandoned Harlem as a target. The risk-to-reward ratio had shifted. If they couldn't even confront one young woman on a residential street without the entire neighborhood mobilizing against them, what could they accomplish? But perhaps the most significant consequence was what happened within Harlem itself. The phone network that had been activated to protect Ruthie Johnson didn't dissolve after August 8th. It became permanent. Store owners, building supers, street vendors, they stayed alert, watching for threats, ready to activate the community response system at any moment. It became known informally as the 139th Street system, and it was used dozens of times over the next decade. When black families faced harassment for moving into borderline neighborhoods, when civil rights workers needed protection during demonstrations, when any member of the community faced coordinated threats, the system was simple: spot the threat, make the calls, flood the area with ordinary people going about their business, create witnesses, create presence, make isolation impossible. It was community defense without violence, strategic protection without confrontation, the kind of resistance that couldn't be easily countered because it didn't look like resistance. It just looked like people living their lives, being in their neighborhood, refusing to abandon their streets to fear. Ruthie Johnson graduated from Hunter College in 1958 with a degree in political science. She went on to earn a master's degree in education from Columbia University and spent 33 years teaching high school history in Harlem Public Schools. She occasionally told her students about the morning of August 8th, 1957, not to glorify her father's criminal organization, but to illustrate a deeper principle about community protection and collective action. The Klan thought they could isolate me, she'd explain. They thought that if they caught me alone on an empty street, fear would keep people away. But what they didn't understand was that Harlem doesn't work that way. In our neighborhood, when someone was threatened, we didn't hide. We showed up. Bumpy Johnson himself rarely spoke about the 139th Street incident, but those close to him noted that it changed something in his approach to protection. He'd always relied on fear and force, the traditional tools of organized crime. But watching an entire neighborhood mobilize to protect his daughter without violence, seeing the power of collective presence over individual intimidation, gave him a different perspective. In the years that followed, when conflicts could be resolved through community organizing rather than criminal enforcement, Bumpy was more willing to let civilians handle things their way. Not because he'd gone soft, but because he'd seen proof that their methods could be more effective. Marcus Webb, the building superintendent whose vigilance had prevented the ambush, lived until 1979. He never publicly confirmed his role in the events of August 8th, but neighborhood elders knew. When he died at age 80, his funeral at Abyssinian Baptist Church was attended by over 500 people, far more than a building superintendent would normally draw. They came because they understood what he'd done, how his watchfulness had protected not just one young woman, but the principle that Harlem could defend itself. The title of this story is KKK Planned an Ambush Near Bumpy Johnson's Family. The street changed routes. That's literally what happened. On August 8th, 1957, 70-plus Harlem residents changed their morning routines, altered their routes, adjusted their schedules, all to ensure that a young woman wouldn't be alone when hate came looking for her. The Klan's plan depended on isolation, on finding a vulnerable target separated from protection. But Harlem refused to provide that isolation. Instead, they flooded 139th Street with ordinary people going about ordinary business, creating an environment where the ambush was impossible. It was resistance through presence, protection through community, defense without confrontation. And it worked. 9 Klan members left Harlem that morning defeated, humiliated, their carefully planned operation dissolved by nothing more than people refusing to abandon their streets. The broader Klan organization learned a lesson too. Harlem wasn't a place where terror tactics worked anymore. The neighborhood had evolved beyond fear. They had systems, networks, collective strategies that could mobilize faster than the Klan could plan. By 1960, Klan membership in New York had dropped to fewer than 500 active members, down from over 15,000 in the 1920s. Part of that decline was due to broader social changes. But incidents like 139th Street demonstrated that in certain neighborhoods, organized hate had simply become operationally impossible. You couldn't terrorize a community that refused to be isolated. You couldn't intimidate people who responded to threats not with fear, but with strategic collective presence. You couldn't succeed with plans that depended on victims being alone when entire neighborhoods were willing to show up and bear witness. The 9 men who planned that ambush scattered. Some quit the Klan. Some moved away. All of them learned that Harlem in 1957 wasn't the same as Harlem in 1927 or 1937 or any previous era when racial terror could operate without organized resistance. The street changed routes that morning. But more importantly, the power dynamic changed. The message sent was clear: threaten one of us, and you'll face all of us. Not with violence, not with retaliation, just with presence, with witnesses, with the simple refusal to leave anyone in our community alone and vulnerable. That's the real story of August 8th, 1957. That's the legacy of the 139th Street system. That's what happened when a Klan ambush met a neighborhood that understood collective protection better than any hate organization understood coordinated intimidation. The street changed routes, and nothing was ever the same again.